Excuse me, sir. This seat is not for someone like you. The cold words sliced through the still air of the first-class cabin on the London to Dubai flight. The soft golden light fell over sparkling champagne glasses, gleamed across the leather seats, then landed on the navy suit that Adrian Miles wore. He sat in seat 1A, the very first row, often reserved for the most powerful and wealthy passengers. But now, curious eyes turned toward him. Some were intrigued, others full of doubt. Clara Jensen, the chief flight attendant, 38, stood with her arms crossed. Her polite smile was undercut by a dismissive glare, as if the verdict had already been written. "Your ticket, sir, please show it again." Adrian, 48, calmly handed over the ticket. It was the third time. Skyworld Airlines, London to Dubai, seat 1A. His voice was steady, neither loud nor soft. But Clara tilted the ticket under the light as though checking for a counterfeit bill. The first-class cabin buzzed with whispers. A silver-haired businessman in seat 2C adjusted his tie and said loudly enough for others to hear, "Finally, someone enforcing the rules." Meanwhile, in seat 3F, an elderly woman clutched her handbag tightly, her sharp gaze hardened by decades of witnessing discrimination disguised as procedure. From seat 4B, 16-year-old Liam Torres started a live stream. The red glow from his phone lit up. "Oh my God, they're throwing a businessman out of seat 1A for no reason at all," he whispered to the camera. Viewers jumped from 300 to 1,200, then 1,800. The sealed cabin in the sky suddenly became a global stage. Clara glanced at Adrian's polished Italian shoes, the platinum watch on his wrist. Everything was refined, yet in her eyes, it was all just an act. "Are you sure? This ticket is really yours?" At that moment, an old memory surged into Adrian's mind. A vision of an 8-year-old boy standing outside a swimming club gate, hearing the cruel words, "There are rules, not everyone is allowed in." The smell of chlorine, the mocking laughter of children inside, his father's hand gripping his shoulder in helpless silence. The sting of being shut out that day now returned, cold as the wind sweeping through the cabin. Adrian said nothing more. He sat upright, his eyes calm, like the surface of a lake before a storm. His silence only seemed to irritate Clara further. Maria Flores, a young attendant of 26, whispered, "Maybe we should—" But Clara cut her off sharply. "Rules are rules." Victor Lee, the purser, 35, appeared like a sentence already decided. "What is going on here?" Clara answered briskly. "This passenger claims he has seat 1A. I do not believe him." Victor nodded, his expression showing the ease of siding with procedure. "Sir, please cooperate. The plane is preparing for departure." Adrian drew in a breath, his eyes sweeping across every face. The disdain, the hesitation, the silence of the majority. In that instant, he saw it clearly. An entire system conditioned to judge by appearances. A young passenger frowned. "Hurry up. I have a connecting flight." Clara smirked, her smile sweet yet venomous. "Your time is up, sir. Please stand." 25 minutes. Enough to turn a person into a mirror reflecting prejudice. Adrian closed his laptop, his hands heavy yet resolute. His voice rang out, low and firm, like a gavel striking in a courtroom. "I need to make a call." Victor frowned. "You are delaying the flight." Adrian lifted his head. His eyes flared, not with the look of a disrespected passenger, but with the gaze of someone holding the power to ground the skies. "Or," he replied, his voice flat yet heavy with meaning, "I am preventing another kind of accident." The cabin fell into silence. No one knew yet that in this moment, a single phone call could shake the entire airline industry. Adrian Miles, the man just dismissed, was not merely a passenger. He was the CEO of the company that operated Skyworld Airlines' entire booking system. And Seat 1A, the seat they tried to take from him, was the beginning of an upheaval. The cabin thickened with tension. The steady rattle of an abandoned luggage wheel, the sighs of impatient passengers, all blended into a heavy soundtrack. Adrian Miles pulled out his phone. His fingers moved across the screen, each motion precise, as if programmed in advance. Clara Jensen immediately snapped, her voice sharp. "Sir, all electronic devices must be switched to airplane mode immediately. That is an order." Adrian did not look up. "1 minute," he said, his tone flat as glass. Victor Lee stepped forward, his eyes cold. "If you do not comply, we will be forced to call in airport security." The words struck like a match. Passengers leaned in, whispering. Liam Torres, the teenager live streaming, clutched his phone, his voice shaking with excitement. "They're about to call security to drag him out. Oh my God, viewers, you're seeing this live!" Viewers surged 8,500, 9,200, 200, 10,000. The hashtag #HadSeat while black began to trend. A young mother in seat 2B holding her infant burst out. "But he hasn't done anything wrong. He's just sitting in the seat he paid for." Instantly, the man in seat 1C barked. "We need to get there on time, not sit here waiting for a troublemaker." The cabin split. On one side, the wall of procedure, Clara, Victor, and those conditioned by blind rules. On the other, scattered voices of protest, faint but resolute. Adrian lifted his gaze. His eyes were cold, sharp, but unnervingly calm. "I apologize for the delay," he said, his deep voice carrying across the cabin. "But this will be resolved shortly." Clara flushed red. "You have no right to address the other passengers." Adrian turned, his words piercing like blades. "Or what will you do? Arrest me for sitting in the seat I purchased?" A stunned silence fell. The live stream shot past 35,000 viewers. The cabin door opened. A uniformed figure stepped inside. Daniel Morales, 42, airport security. His face weary, his movements rehearsed from too many shifts. His voice rang out like a script played 100 times. "Sir, you have 60 seconds to comply. If not, we will escort you off this plane." The cabin held its breath. Clara smirked, certain that rules had finally won. Adrian locked eyes with Daniel, his voice cut like steel. "Arrested for what?" Daniel faltered. Victor quickly interjected, firm. "For failing to comply with crew instructions." Adrian leaned forward, his gaze drilling deep. "No, I will tell you the real reason. Arrested for sitting in first class with skin like mine." The cabin erupted. A deadly hush, then gasps, heavy breathing, murmurs rising. The live stream soared past 50,000 viewers. Comments flooded in. "Keep recording. That's blatant discrimination. What airline is this?" For the first time in years on duty, Daniel Morales felt his hand tremble on his cuffs. He could not deny it. The words had struck raw truth. Adrian turned back to his phone. Without asking, he typed swiftly, his fingers moving like a programmer entering an emergency code. "Confirm, Protocol 7, he said evenly. A female voice replied through the line. "Received. Shutting down system chain. All Skyworld flights will halt departures immediately." Instantly, cabin lights flickered. The intercom stuttered as the captain's voice broke. "Ladies and gentlemen, The system has encountered a technical issue. All flights are temporarily suspended. The cabin exploded in chaos. Some shouted, some frantically dialed phones. The man in seat 1C went pale, stammering. "Stopped all flights? What does that mean?" Clara froze. Victor's jaw dropped. Daniel's radio screamed with urgent calls. "All Skyworld flights have been ground-stopped, nationwide." In the golden glow of first class, Adrian sat tall, laptop open. The screen lit his face. Not the face of a man humiliated, but the face of one who had just brought the skies to a standstill. The cabin was no longer just a place to argue over a seat. It had become the battlefield between hidden power and visible prejudice, and this was only the beginning. The murmurs in the cabin swelled into a storm. Some passengers pulled out their phones to call business partners. Others typed frantic emails. "I'll be late! The plane is grounded!" No one knew why the entire Skyworld Airline system had collapsed. Only one man knew, and he was sitting right in front of them. In seat 1A, Clara Jensen stood frozen. She had just witnessed it. With a single cold command, Adrian Miles had brought the skies to their knees. But instead of admitting it, she tried to cover. What did you just do? This is just a coincidence. Don't think you." Adrian did not look at her. He typed a few more lines on his laptop. A dashboard flashed onto the screen, red letters scrolling. "System override. Global booking offline." Victor Lee swallowed hard and stepped back. He had never seen a passenger access a system that should only exist in the operations center. Teenager Liam Torres zoomed in on his live stream, his voice shaking. "My God, do you see this? He just shut down the whole airline with a few keystrokes." Viewers leapt from 50,000 to 75,000 in minutes. Comments poured in. "Who is this man? Is this the Shadow CEO? Don't stop streaming." A ringtone cut through the air. Adrian's phone lit up, its sound echoing across the cabin. He answered, setting it on speaker. A man's voice thundered, filled with power and panic. "Adrian, this is Robert Kane, CEO of Skyworld Airlines. Tell me right now, what is happening?" The cabin thickened with silence. The confirmation fell like a blade, cutting the truth in two. The man dismissed until now was not just a passenger. He was Adrian Miles, CEO of Miles Tech Systems, the technology company with a $900 million contract running Skyworld's entire booking infrastructure. Adrian replied, his voice steady, chillingly calm. "Robert, what you're experiencing now is the direct consequence of how your employees treat your customers." The cabin froze. Clara's face drained of color. She stumbled back into an empty seat. Victor turned away, unable to meet Adrian's gaze. Daniel Morales, the security officer, pressed his radio to his ear, hearing his superiors barking frantically. "Confirm immediately. The system collapse originated from Miles Tech. Adrian Miles is on the London to Dubai flight. Do not touch him." The man in seat 1C, who had smugly demanded rules be enforced, now sat hunched, sweat streaking down his temple. He whispered to himself, "God, I just scolded the CEO of our biggest strategic partner." Adrian closed his laptop. He lifted his head, his gaze sweeping slowly across the cabin, over faces shifting from contempt to confusion to regret. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said deliberately, "I have sat here for 25 minutes. 25 minutes for a man to be reduced to prejudice, and just 25 seconds for an entire system to collapse." The words weighed heavy as lead. Those who had looked away now stared at him. Adrian leaned back in his seat, his voice steady as the strike of a gavel. "And this is only the beginning." Outside the window, the sunset spread across the runway, but inside first class, No one noticed the beauty of the horizon. They saw only one truth. The man humiliated minutes ago was the man who could bring the skies to a halt, and the game of power had just begun. The first-class cabin felt drained of air. Every eye was fixed on Adrian Miles. No one dared to cough. No whispers of scorn remained. Only the faint hiss of the air conditioning and the cold golden light casting tense shadows on every face. Robert Kane, CEO of Skyworld Airlines, was still on the line. His voice cracked, torn between anger and desperation. "Adrian, we've lost the entire booking system. Flights are grounded across the globe. The losses every minute. Do you even realize how much we're bleeding?" Adrian closed his eyes briefly, as if he had been waiting for this moment all his life. When he opened them, his gaze was sharp as a blade. "I know, Robert. I know better than anyone. And I also know the value of a human being is greater than the numbers you're counting." Clara Jensen gripped the edge of her seat, her hands trembling. His words pierced straight through the armor of confidence she once wore. Victor Lee, the purser who had sided with procedure, felt his heart pound as if being pulled out of his comfort zone. Daniel Morales, the security officer, stood frozen, realizing for the first time in his career that the radio in his hand felt unbearably heavy. Adrian opened his laptop again. On the screen, the contract appeared, a clause flashing in red. Clause 14.2 Material Breach. He zoomed in and read aloud, his voice clear for the entire cabin. "Any discriminatory act at the point of customer interaction, if proven, constitutes a material breach, permitting the service provider to enact emergency measures." Robert fell silent. He knew that clause. He had always treated it as harmless legal formality. Today, it had become the hammer crashing down on Skyworld's brand. Adrian lifted his head, his voice strong and firm. "I have 3 conditions. First, suspend Chief Attendant Clara Jensen immediately pending investigation. Second, every frontline Skyworld employee must complete implicit bias training within 60 days with measurable results. Third, establish an independent reporting system so no one can bury the truth behind office doors." The cabin was silent. Clara's lips parted, her eyes brimming. You want me fired?" Adrian turned to her, his voice as even as a calm lake before a storm. "No. I want you to learn. Punishment without a second chance is revenge, but opportunity without consequence is indulgence." A few passengers nodded quietly, for the first time looking at him not with suspicion but with respect. The elderly woman in seat 3F smiled, as if she had just seen justice take light. On the line, Robert Kane exhaled heavily. "And if we do not agree?" Adrian placed his hand on the keyboard. The screen displayed the words, "Terminate agreement. Estimated cost, $2.8 billion. He did not need to explain further. Everyone understood. With one keystroke, Skyworld would sink. Silence followed. Then Robert spoke, his voice lowered, shaking slightly. "You will have our response in writing within the hour." Adrian closed his laptop. He leaned back in his seat, his eyes sweeping across the cabin. His voice was low but resonant, like a final judgment. "This is not my victory. This is your test." In the cabin, some bowed their heads in shame. Some looked at him with reverence, and others realized for the first time that true power does not lie in a seat, but in how it is used to demand justice. Adrian Miles, once humiliated simply for not fitting the image of a first-class passenger, had turned the skies into a courtroom where every mask was stripped away. The first-class cabin was silent, the air so heavy that every breath seemed to carry weight. Those who had once sat so comfortably in leather seats now felt small before the truth laid bare. They were not just witnesses to a personal clash, but to a revolution. Clara Jensen's face was pale, her lips trembling. She wanted to say something, to justify, to plead, but her throat tightened as if strangled. Deep down, she realized that every gaze in the cabin was now on her. No longer in control, she had become the accused, standing before an invisible court. Victor Lee's heart raced. For his entire career, he had taken pride in always following procedure. Yet now, procedure seemed hollow. He recalled crisis training sessions, slides about diversity and inclusion, that he had brushed aside as mere checkboxes. All of it felt like mockery in this moment. Daniel Morales, the security officer, gripped his radio tightly. For the first time in years, the leather gloves on his hands felt ice cold. The urgent command from his superior crackled in his ear. "Confirm the situation, Daniel. Do not lay a hand on Adrian Miles under any circumstances." The order jolted him awake, and he realized just how close he had come to a mistake that could never be undone. Adrian looked around, his eyes bright, not with fury, but with the resolve of a man who had endured a lifetime and now finally had the chance to end the contempt. He spoke, not loudly, not quickly, but each word landed like a nail driven deep. "You have all witnessed it. This is no longer about a seat. This is proof of a system that has lost its way." In seat 2B, the young mother holding her child nodded, her eyes shining. The elderly woman in 3F whispered, "Justice finally speaks." Meanwhile, the man in 1C, who had once demanded Adrian be thrown out, bowed his head, hiding his flushed face in his hands. Liam Torres's phone buzzed non-stop. His live stream had surged past 120,000 viewers. The comments poured in endlessly. "Who is he? A modern-day hero. Don't stop streaming," Liam whispered, his eyes wide. "Oh my God, this will be history." Robert Kane's voice still echoed from the line, heavy and resigned. "Adrian, I will sign the agreement within an hour. But you must understand, this shock will shake the entire industry." Adrian's lips curved into a faint smile, not of joy, but of resolve. "Robert, I don't care about shock. I care about real change. It is time for Skyworld Airlines and the entire service industry to learn to see people before they see tickets." The words dropped, and the cabin froze in silence. Then suddenly a few claps rang out. 1, 2, then more, spreading like waves. Not everyone joined, but enough to make Clara bow her head, her shoulders sinking under the weight. Adrian closed his laptop. He sat tall, his eyes fixed on the space ahead. He did not need to shout or pound the table. He let the truth speak for itself, and it shone brighter than any light in that first-class cabin. Outside, the runway remained still, the engines silent. But inside the plane, a new order had just begun, and every passenger knew they had witnessed a beginning that could never be undone. The applause faded, giving way to a heavy silence where everyone seemed to be waiting for the next judgment. Clara Jensen sank into an empty seat by the aisle, her hands clutching at her skirt, her back rigid. All the pride that once carried her tall through the first-class cabin had shattered, leaving only a raw feeling: shame. Adrian Miles looked straight at her. His eyes were no longer daggers of accusation, but a mirror reflecting back at her. "Ms. Jensen," his voice rang slow and clear, "you will be suspended. But this is not the end." Clara's head jerked up. She expected the word "fired," but it never came. Instead, Adrian continued, "You will be the first to enter the bias training program. And once you finish, you will stand before your colleagues and teach them what you have learned." The cabin stirred with surprise. A few passengers gasped audibly. The man in seat 1C whispered, "He doesn't want revenge?" Adrian's voice was firm. "Punishment without opportunity is revenge. Opportunity without consequence is indulgence. I want justice, but justice must come with change." Helen Brooks, the elderly woman in 3F, smiled faintly, her wrinkled eyes shining. She whispered just loud enough for young attendant Maria Flores to hear. "This is true leadership. Someone who turns mistakes into lessons instead of wounds." Victor Lee, the purser who had so forcefully invoked procedure, felt his throat tighten. In that instant, he saw the vast distance between following rules and doing what is right. Before his eyes, Adrian had turned seat 1A into a pulpit for the entire airline industry. Daniel Morales, the security officer, drew in a deep breath. He remembered the countless times he had just followed orders without asking whether those orders were right or wrong. For the first time, the weight of responsibility felt heavier than the radio strapped to his side. Liam Torres's phone buzzed non-stop. His live stream had surged past 150,000 viewers, the comments roaring, "This is real justice. Make this law." I will never forget those words. Robert Kane remained on the line, silent for what felt like centuries. Then came his hurried breaths, the sound of papers rustling through the speaker. "Adrian, I agree. Clara will be suspended immediately. The training program will launch within 60 days, and I will sign approval for an independent reporting system." Adrian gave a small nod, as though he had known the answer all along. "Robert, this is not my victory. This is Skyworld's last chance to prove they deserve to fly these skies." The cabin fell silent again, but this time, the silence was not fear. It was realization. Everyone understood. They had just witnessed justice, not as punishment, but as restoration. Adrian leaned back and closed his eyes. For a moment, he remembered the 8-year-old boy standing outside the gates of the swimming club, his small hand clutching a towel in trembling fingers. That boy had once been excluded, but today, the man they had tried to drag from seat 1A was opening the door for an entire system to step into a new future. Justice, in the end, is not about pulling someone down. It is about lifting everyone to stand together. The first-class cabin no longer felt like it had a takeoff. The golden light from the ceiling lamps poured down over silent faces as though it were shining into the conscience of each person. Every passenger understood. They were not just watching a dramatic scene unfold. They had become witnesses to a moment that could reshape an entire industry. Clara Jensen sat motionless, her hands clasped tightly together. Tears threatened to fall, but she held them back. In her mind, Adrian's words still echoed. "Punishment without opportunity is revenge." The words were both a sentence and a lifeline. For the first time in her life, Clara felt she had to relearn how to be human before she could be a flight attendant. Victor Lee felt his shoulders weighed down like stone. He had once taken pride in always backing procedure, but now he realized that procedure could not save an airline's honor, nor could it preserve the trust of its passengers. He looked at Adrian, the man he had dismissed, and saw instead the image of a judge who needed no courtroom. Daniel Morales remained by the cabin door, his eyes fixed on his radio. The urgent voice of his commander barked orders, but for the first time he did not want to respond right away. He wondered how many times in his life he had concealed injustice simply because it was part of the job. And today, could he find the courage to change? Meanwhile, Liam Torres kept live streaming. The viewers had surged past 180,000, the comments pouring in like a storm. This is the start of a movement. I will not stay silent anymore. Remember hashtag seat while black. Let's turn it into hashtag witness for change. The man in seat 1C, the one who had demanded Adrian be removed, trembled as he rose to his feet. He bowed deeply before Adrian. "Sir, I am sorry. I was wrong." Adrian gave only a slight nod, his voice calm. "You do not need to apologize to me. Remember this feeling. And next time you see injustice, do not stay silent." His words shook the cabin once again. Several passengers looked at one another, then nodded, as if signing an invisible pact. From this day forward, they would no longer stand on the sidelines. Robert Kane's voice returned over the line, hoarse and strained. "Adrian, the commitments will be drafted immediately, but I beg you keep this conversation private. If the media finds out, Skyworld will be destroyed." Adrian closed his laptop, his eyes glowing like fire in the dark. His voice was slow, each word falling like the strike of a hammer. "No, Robert. Some stories need witnesses. Some changes only have meaning when the whole world sees them." In the cabin, a few claps broke out. This time they were not isolated. They spread, building into a strong rhythm like an oath. Clara wept. Victor sat still, his head bowed. Daniel Morales pressed the button to switch off his radio, choosing silence not to escape responsibility but to listen to his own conscience. Adrian looked around the cabin, his voice deep and unwavering. "From this moment, every one of you here is a witness, and a witness has two choices: to stand aside or to become a force for change." The atmosphere burst open. On Liam's live stream, the flood of comments condensed into one single message: "I will not stay silent." In that first-class cabin, a seat that once seemed meaningless had become a pulpit. And the lesson carved into everyone's mind was deeper than any textbook could teach. Justice lives only when someone dares to stand as a witness. The applause faded, leaving behind an unusual silence. It was not embarrassment, nor was it fear. It was a heavy silence, where every heartbeat quickened, where each person understood they had just crossed an invisible boundary. In seat 2B, the young mother holding her infant clutched the blanket tightly. She whispered, as if to herself, but loud enough for the person beside her to hear, "My child will grow up in a better world if today we do not turn away." Helen Brooks, the elderly woman in seat 3F, leaned back, her eyes blazing as if witnessing a new chapter of history. She had lived long enough to know that most injustice passed quietly, because people chose silence. But today, she saw that silence had been broken. Clara Jensen wiped away a tear. Inside, Adrian's words echoed, "Opportunity without consequence is indulgence." The phrase pierced her like a needle, but also opened a way forward. She had never been so afraid, yet never more desperate for a chance to begin again. Victor Lee sat frozen. He recalled every time a passenger had complained, every time he brushed them aside, choosing procedure over listening. In his mind, a question hammered. If I had acted differently then, could someone have been spared humiliation like this? Daniel Morales stood near the cabin door, his hand trembling on the radio. He had chosen to switch it off, to stand with the truth. For the first time in years, he felt he was not just security, but a human being. Liam Torres's phone continued to buzz. The live stream had surged past 200,000 viewers. The comments poured like a flood. "I'll tell this story to my whole class tomorrow. This is a moment we must remember. #witness for change is trending." Adrian looked around the cabin, his eyes no longer burning with anger, but glowing with something else. Hope. He knew this moment was bigger than himself. It was no longer about a contested seat in 1A, but about a door opening for an entire service industry, a future where people could not be judged solely by appearance. He folded his laptop and placed it neatly on the tray table. His voice carried, low but resolute. Today, the sky stopped, not because of me, but because of everyone who has ever stayed silent in the face of injustice. And from this moment, none of us can say, "I didn't know." The cabin fell silent once more, but this time it was the silence of new awareness, of hearts awakened. Outside the window, the crimson sunset spread across the runway, its streaks of light stretching like an invisible contract. A contract that needed no signature, but was etched in the eyes of hundreds of thousands of witnesses watching through a live stream. Adrian leaned back, his hands clasped, his eyes closed. He knew the game of power was far from over. This was only the first bell, and the tremors of that bell would spread far beyond this cabin, beyond the skies between London and Dubai, reaching millions who were waiting for a reason to never stay silent again. In the night sky, the airplane remained motionless, like a steel beast chained in place. But inside the first-class cabin, the aftershocks of what had just happened had not faded. Every passenger knew they had become the first link in a chain of change that no one could stop. Clara Jensen sat still. Her face bore the mark of defeat, yet in her eyes flickered a new resolve. Adrian's words echoed over and over in her mind. Opportunity without consequence is indulgence. She understood this was no longer just a job. It was her one chance to begin again, or be swallowed forever by her mistake. Victor Lee rested his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tightly as he stared at the thick carpet. He remembered the dozens of times he had chosen procedure over fairness. For the first time, he admitted that the training sessions he had dismissed as empty formalities had in fact been the bridge he refused to cross. Now that bridge had returned, higher, harder, but he knew he had to step onto it. Daniel Morales stepped back against the cabin wall, his heart filled with an unfamiliar feeling. Relief. His radio hung silent at his side, and for the first time, he was not using it as a shield to hide his conscience. In that silence, he heard more clearly than any order, the whisper of his own morality. Liam Torres, the teenager clutching his phone, was close to tears from excitement. His live stream had passed 250,000 viewers. The comments surged like a flood. "I will share this clip with my entire school. This is not just a flight. This is a history lesson. Had witness for change worldwide." Adrian Miles slowly opened his eyes, his gaze sweeping across every face. He no longer needed to speak at length. What he had done had planted a seed, and that seed was already sprouting before their eyes. He spoke only one sentence, slow and deliberate, etched into the air. Change does not come from outrage. It comes from action with consequence, and today you have witnessed that action. Applause broke out again, this time not scattered but unified. From 1F to 4A, from passengers once indifferent to those who had doubted, they joined together in recognition. Clara bowed her head as tears fell. Victor lifted his gaze, his eyes transformed. Morales gave a subtle nod, a promise to himself. Outside the window, darkness blanketed the runway, but inside the cabin the light shone brighter than ever. A seat once dismissed as unworthy had become a pulpit, and every person in that cabin, whether they agreed or not, had become an unwilling student in a lesson called restorative justice. Adrian closed his eyes once more, but this time He smiled, because he knew the chain reaction had begun, and nothing could stop it. The roar of the airplane's engines returned. After hours of paralysis, the Skyworld system had finally been restored. The captain's voice came through the intercom, calm but with a faint tremor. "Ladies and gentlemen, systems are now stable. We will be departing in just a few minutes." But for those seated in first class, this flight had taken off long ago, not on the runway, but within their consciousness. Clara Jensen wiped the tears from her face. She had never felt so small, but at the same time had never seen her path so clearly. She would have to change. There was no other way. Now, each beat of her heart was a reminder that if she wanted to keep wearing that uniform, she would have to be worthy of it. Victor Lee sat in silence, staring at the empty seat before him. He thought of his colleagues on dozens of other flights, people who clung to procedure just as he once had. He exhaled deeply, but within that breath was a newfound resolve. When he returned, he would be the first to volunteer for training. Daniel Morales adjusted the radio at his side. He no longer saw it as a tool for imposing rules, but as a responsibility to protect. In the quiet of that moment, he heard Adrian's words echo in his mind. "Next time you see injustice, do not stay silent." In the row behind, Liam Torres lowered his phone. The live stream had passed 300,000 viewers, and the hashtag #WitnessForChange was trending at the top worldwide. The teenager had never imagined he would witness history on this flight. He whispered to himself, "I'll never just sit still again." Adrian Miles closed his laptop, his fingers interlaced. The golden cabin light reflected across his face, not with the glow of victory, but with the presence of a man who had planted seeds for an entire forest. He told himself, "This story does not end here. It has only begun." The aircraft surged down the runway, its wings trembling before lifting from the ground. In the instant the wheels left the earth, everyone felt the transformation. They were not only leaving London for Dubai, they were leaving behind an old world where prejudice reigned, and heading toward a new sky where justice had been set alight. Clara gazed out the window and whispered, "This isn't just a flight. This is a lesson for life." Adrian tilted his head, his eyes fixed on the vast sky ahead. He knew that when the wheels touched down in Dubai, the aftershocks from Seat 1A would continue to spread, beyond the airline, beyond aviation itself, reaching every place where people were still judged by appearances. One seat, one man, one decision. And the entire sky had changed. In the world of service and business, justice does not always arrive in a courtroom. Sometimes it begins with a single seat, where one person dares to stand and say, "Enough." The story of Adrian Miles shows us that true strength is not found in financial power or titles, but in the ability to turn a moment of injustice into a lever for systemic change. This is restorative justice, where mistakes are acknowledged, those at fault are given the chance to make amends, and society as a whole takes a step toward progress. If you believe stories like this must be shared to awaken awareness and inspire change, press like and subscribe to join us on the journeys to come. And before you leave a comment with the words, "Stand up," to remind us all that in every moment, we always have a choice to stay silent or to stand tall.